very competitive, sees very far, is a great strategist, and has great loyalty.
He'll give you all the rope in the world to hang yourself.
He's leading a company that's going where no other company has ever been.
The best thing in sports is winning, and the second best thing is losing. Well, of course, my big dream was always to make the Olympic Games, which I fell far short of, and realized at about age 16 that I probably would. But I think that was the ambition and the emotion, and I think that I suppose in some ways, if you want to psychoanalyze me for a second, that I never got over that. So I tried to make the Olympic Games in some other field.
Being unhappy with a given situation is a strong basis to build a company on.
Follow your dream.
The lack of good running shoes and the desire to win every race have built a company that in the coming years will have a turnover of $6 billion in a global marketplace estimated at just over $12 billion. Its chairman and founder owns 36% of the shares, valued at $2 billion. This is the story of the man who ran never to be number one, but who worked to become the largest sports shoe maker of all time, named appropriately after the Greek goddess of victory.
Follow your dream.
Nike.
Nike came into my office one day, or came in that day and said, "Do you have $10 that I can borrow for lunch?" Looked at my wallet and all I had is a 20. He said, "I'll take it. Thanks," And he left. And I thought, man, that's amazing. This guy's a millionaire, and he just came in and borrowed money from me for lunch. So when I saw Work School, I said, this is really unbelievable. Knight came in and borrowed $20 from me for lunch. He said, "You didn't give Knight money, did you?" I said, "Well, yeah, he came in and borrowed." He said, "Don't ever give Knight money. Don't ever loan him money. He hits up everybody. He never carries money. Don't give him money. You'll never get it back." I never have. He's never paid me back. I've been here almost 12 years. He still owes me $20.
He's basically now very much the same person that he was when I knew him a long time ago, when this thing was very, very small. The same personal traits are there.
He really allows a lot of freedom to the people in the company to kind of do their own thing.
He has a very loose management style. He'll give you all the rope in the world to hang yourself, and you really have to be a self-starter to work around here.
Working at Nike is like
a three-ring circus with a Chinese fire drill moving through the middle.
Saturday Night Live, 7 days a week. Continually being on the set of like an Indiana Jones movie, a factory for fun.
It's intense. It's really like finals night.
Being in a playground.
Coming down the face of a wave.
Beethoven Symphony.
Being on a roller coaster.
There's moments where it's soft and subtle, and but then there's times where it'll crescendo into a great, powerful moment.
But the Greeks had an interesting philosophy. They ran naked. They didn't have to worry about packing around a lot of extra equipment.
Basically, I ran on the University of Oregon track team, which was one of the United States' best distance groups, has been for 50 years. And the coach was very innovative and a unique individual, and that he was, in my last couple of years as a member of that team, always tinkering with shoes.
And he put it on and he ran around, and another runner came by and said, "Where'd you get the funny-looking shoes?"
An athlete is not going to use equipment that isn't going to be up to their personal standards.
But Otis put the shoes on and ran around in the dark, and all you could see was the white shoes.
They've got to have the best.
Otis would not give them back to Phil Knight.
I wrote a paper at Stanford Business School about the possibility of Japanese sports shoes, making an impact in the U.S. market. The German sports shoes were beginning to dominate the market. It was the theory of this paper that Japanese shoes could kind of do to German shoes what Japanese cameras had done to German cameras, making inroads into this market. When I graduated, I went to Japan for a couple months and basically made a very technical survey looking at some shoes in a department store and saying the Tiger shoes are the best in this market. I ordered samples. The samples came in and I sent them down to my old track coach, who later became the United States Olympic coach. He was very well respected in the track and field community, and he said, let me in on this venture. And so we shook hands and became a 50-50 partnership in 1964.
We both put in about $500 apiece. That's my recollection. Later on, when we started importing at a higher level, I think he borrowed $5,000 from his father, and I went to the bank and borrowed $5,000.
The whole world of shoes consisted of Adidas and Puma, and the thought that anybody would, break into that was just didn't penetrate anybody until he started working with this stuff and was saying, hey, there are other ways to do this.
I was having breakfast with Barbara, and she was turning out these waffles, like this one here, and I looked at the cleats on that thing, and I thought, hey, that's just exactly what I want. So I got in a hurry. I got everything all set, but I forgot to put the releasing agent in. That's what butter is. It's a releasing agent to get the waffle on. So I got this doggone thing in there, and church was just about to get out. So I cooled it off by putting it in the sink, and then I took this thing, but it wasn't as cool as I thought it was. I got a hold of a pair of pliers and I stood on it and I reared back on it, and the waffle iron didn't break, but it bent up about almost to a right angle. And I looked at my waffle board, the part I've got out, and I thought, hey, that's just exactly what I want.
Shoes are designed for protecting feet. Athlete shoes add traction, stability, and cushioning. That's all. Yet in the last decade, shoes have become more than a tool. They become an expression of attitude. No longer are sports shoes only worn for sport. They now form an integral part of our daily mode of dress. But however valid that premise may be, and however much money is earned from it, for Knight's endeavors, sport will forever remain the starting point.
It's really, in some ways, it's like a ballet in that it's just a beautiful art form. At the same time, there's a competition going on. And so I think it really, as I say, creates a lot of interest and emotion.
A lot of sport is not just a picture of an athlete on television or a picture of an athlete in the newspaper. It's the emotion.
Really kind of the two international emotions that aren't related to war or something like that really are universal are music and sports. Sport has become really the dominant part of American culture. It's really the leisure activity and the thing that really families do together. They bond around the TV set watching sporting events probably more than any other thing. 2 years ago, Boris Becker won the Australian Open and he went racing through the streets because it made him the #1 player in the world. Last year, Jim Courier won this tournament and he ran and jumped in the Yarrow River.
There's no better feeling for me than shaking hands in a match after you've won a big match. I mean, it's just such an adrenaline rush, and you can't. Everyone has those kind of highs in their lives. Just different things cause them, and for me, that's the biggest high. Well, I remember thinking, I wasn't even really aware of the fact that I could win the match on match point. Because I was thinking, he's just 3 serves away from holding serve. He's down match point. He hits 3 serves, it's game. It's 5-all in the 5th set now. So he missed his first serve, and then I realized, I promised, I said to myself, with one backhand return, because I figured he was going to come into the backhand, the whole thing could be over with, the whole entire championship. And he served in my backhand, and I hit the return, and he hit into the net. And it's like I knew it was over, but the feeling of everything just coming off my shoulders at once. I went down on my knees, and I promise you, when I had my hands on my head like this, I kept saying to myself, I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. I kept saying that over and over again. I can't believe it's over. I can't believe I did it. I just kept saying, I can't believe it, because I couldn't believe it.
Sport is unique in that it creates that emotion. I mean, the ballet and a painting aren't able to create that same kind of emotion.
Sports and fitness used to be shoes and apparel. It's no longer. Sports and fitness is a whole operation, which is really a creature of his imagination.
we've probably done the best job of anyone in the business of capturing the emotion of sports and the nature of competition and the personality of the athletes and the passion that's involved.
Athletes are just becoming more and more amazing every day. I think that it's incredible what these people are able to do. I mean, Michael Jordan is the extreme. Some of the things he does on the basketball court, you know, the human body isn't supposed to do, but he doesn't know that. And the same thing out here at the tennis. Some of these shots that you see both the men and the women pull off, you say, how in the world did they do that?
Nobody really was talking to the athletes about sport. You could go to a retail store and you'd have some conversation with the clerk across the counter, but what we found out by driving around and going to the actual sporting events that the athletes were telling you what they wanted. They wanted more cushioning, they wanted better fit, they wanted more support. They just wanted attention. They wanted to talk to somebody who knew their sport.
And we speak to spectators as well as athletes, and it's that communication and we just immersed ourselves in this whole essence of sport.
We found out that runners were techno geeks. They love shoes. They love to bend them and smell them and wear them and touch them and talk about them.
First year sales were $8,000, and but even though that's all the sales were, the profits were $273. So we were profitable on $8,000 sales since we didn't have any expenses.
And I was like a mini store with all my shoes in the back of my van. I drive around to the schools and show the new shoes, try to sell some, and to get shoes onto athletes to get us that credibility we needed when we were young.
Even in the 1960s, why 26 out of 27 new businesses failed. And I would gather today the ratio is higher, I would expect. But so, I mean, the probability, I wasn't so foolish to know that the probability wasn't that I would succeed. I just wanted it to, and I thought it had a chance and it had a niche. But, and that's what I wanted to do. But the fact, and so basically the accounting background was for training and fallback, I suppose, but education as much as anything.
We were nothing. We were just a little tiny company, and like Adidas was this giant monster, and there was absolutely no demand for Nike shoes. Basically, retailers didn't need another athletic shoe. They just didn't need it.
The market was pretty closed. And he solved the problem by sending his sisters out around the Portland schools, sending track people. My son Jay was, I asked son Jay, I said, how much money are you making on these shoes that you're selling for $1? And his response, he's a little close-mouthed about his entrepreneurial activities. He said, a good deal more than you think.
The nerve-wracking moments in the early days were really whether you're going to survive or not. So that can be pretty nerve-wracking. But the fact is that after you reach a certain level, how much more nerve-wracking can it get? And it still can get nerve-wracking, but in ways that maybe wouldn't make any sense to any outsider. It's when you have a certain hope and plan for a certain segment of the business. It doesn't really involve whether or not your business is going to succeed or fail in the next 12 months like it used to in the early days when they were just trying to keep the wolf from the door and keep him from repossessing the house.
One time, I remember I got my paycheck in the mail, and I'd open it up and there was a little note inside, and it says, "Dear Nelson, I hope things are going well for you in Southern California. Keep up the good work. Oh, by the way, don't cash this check till next week." So I just assumed there was, transferring money from one account to another. I didn't think anything about it. Well, we had run out of money, and there wasn't enough money for payroll.
Even if it would have failed, I would have tried it again. Frank Schallenberger, who was the teacher at Stanford, who was really, I felt, very inspirational, had a saying. He says, if you're an entrepreneur, the only time you must succeed is the last time you try. And I like that.
Within 20 years, the sports-loving students of Oregon State University were the biggest shoemakers in the world. What started in a garage and was sold from the back of a car is now based on a magnificent lot in Beaverton, Oregon. Attractive offices, parks, fitness centers, running tracks, everything designed to create optimum atmosphere and performance. The heritage of the great sports personalities who ran with Phil Knight or wore his shoes is forever imprinted into the complex. Phil Knight is as unassuming as he's loyal, honoring those that played a vital part in the history of his company. People like Steve Prefontaine.
Prefontaine was really about emotion. He was emotional the way he ran, the way that the crowd reacted to his running, the way his initial involvement with this company was.
He had a quote that was, "To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift."
He was an inspiration to the youngsters. He used to go out and running around the streets of Eugene, and he looked like the Pied Piper leading the children of Hamlin. And he might have 10 or he might have 50 youngsters running along, and he's running along talking to them, walking slow as the slowest one wants to go.
He was an incredibly focused, dedicated athlete, and it was more than just being a champion. His personality and his focus was incredibly intense.
He really personified the competitor. He was kind of the Muhammad Ali of his sport. He had the uncanny ability to predict his performance based on where he was in his training and go out and do it. And I think the reason the fans showed up every week was to see if this time maybe he was wrong. And he was usually right.
He also sort of linked his star to our wagon when he never had to. I mean, basically, the establishment companies, Adidas, Puma, everybody offered him more money for an endorsement. But it was an Oregon company. He says, I'll go with you guys. So, I mean, there's obviously an emotional bond just from that decision.
He once told me he wasn't going to run the 6 mile because it wasn't his event. And I said, Bree, you are the runner and I'm the coach. I said, where are you going to run next week if you don't run the 6 mile? And he turned on his heel and walked off about 20 yards, and he came back and he said, I'll run the 6 mile, but I won't like it. He broke the school record. He was mad.
People that didn't know him that well tell me that they thought he was cocky or arrogant, kind of like a John McEnroe. But I've told people he's simply the most honest man I ever knew.
At the time he lost his life, he was just approaching maturity. He had graduated, he was 1 year out of school, and he ran against Frank Shorter out here in the 5,000 meter and beat Shorter, the gold medal winner from the previous Olympics. And then the accident happened right up on that hill up there and he was killed.
He was really has created an emotion with the people at Nike that are still here, that were there when he was, that is beyond words.
Steve would not wear a product until it was absolutely right, and one of the things he did, he forced us to make shoes with a one-piece toe, which at the time we weren't doing. All of our shoes had two-piece toes, and Steve demanded it because his feet were bleeding. And now if you look at all Nike shoes, they all have a one-piece toe, so it started with him.
Follow your dream.
We started on the premise that we were going to make better products.
The values of the company are a lot of Phil's values. You know, when you look at the Disney Corporation, Walt Disney's stamp is all over the Disney Corporation. When I think you look at Nike, Phil Knight's stamp is all over the Nike Corporation.
Competitiveness, honesty, innovation, collaboration, integrity, those types of things that I suppose in many ways you'd like for your children too.
Right from the beginning, Phil has been very big on collaborative management. He studied a lot of Asian business practices. He was really fascinated with them prior to founding Nike, and really liked certain elements of their business practices, and I think the collaborative management part of it was definitely one of them. And with that comes a real emphasis on teamwork.
Making yourself do what you say you're going to do, keep your promises, be real honest about your relationships, and when you have problems, be honest about solving them.
Take risks, but if you be honest about whether it's succeeded or it's failed, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, but just admit that you've made a mistake.
Articulating those things become much more important as you get bigger. When you're small, they're sort of understood without being spoken. And then you get a little bigger and you really kind of define what it is you've been doing.
Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman were together at the University of Oregon. Bill Bowerman, of course, was Phil's track coach, and they really didn't feel that the athletic shoes that were available at that time were as good as they should be. And so they took a real interest in how shoes were made, and how you could make them lighter, how you could make them more cushioned, And that was really how the company was founded. It was founded on the premise that Nike was going to make the best products for championship athletes. So when you have a founding principle like that, and the founder is still actively part of the business, it really takes away a lot of questions about what your mission is. We really know that we are trying to make better products for people who are involved in sports and fitness.
I consider the best part of my college education was the activity at Hayward Field running for the University of Oregon track team. I think our track coach there called himself not a track coach but a professor of competitive responses, and so I think some of the best training I had came off the athletic field, and I really think that's true today, is that you learn a lot of lessons on the athletic field and how to compete, and some of the values that we have as a company really came off the athletic field.
Sport is not simply a pastime. The physical and psychological effort needed to win makes sport a character builder. The coach, or professor of competitive responses, understood this perfectly. He put things in perspective, motivated the runners, and tinkered with the shoes.
I think that the shoe for American or most of the international runners is probably the most important piece of equipment that they have. The exception, Abibi Bikila, the Ethiopian 2-time Olympic marathon champion, didn't wear shoes. He didn't need to. He'd never worn shoes in his life. But my friend Gigengak at the Yale University thought he would bring him into Yale to study, why is this man so much better than everyone else? He brought him in and he put shoes on him. He couldn't beat anybody. And so back to barefoot running, and he was a great runner again.
Bill Bowerman was always fascinated by the quest for barefoot running. Great athletes are written all over Bowerman's history. From his perch overlooking the valley of Eugene, Oregon, Bowerman, who's now well into his 80s, brought the innovation to the athletic track that made it so immensely popular. He introduced jogging to the US and knew that the equipment of a runner is extremely important.
After World War II, and I had been coaching for 7 years in high school and 2 years afterwards, but there were no good shoes in this country. All the old shoemakers were either retired or they'd found something else to do, and the Germans made a very good shoe. But I couldn't afford it for our track people. It also was fairly heavy, up around 10 ounces. The pre-war running shoes were down around 6 ounces. I fiddled around until I could make competition shoes, and they varied in weight from maybe 3.5 ounces up to maybe 6 ounces. But none of our people competed in a shoe that was over 6 ounces. If a man picks up his foot and lays it back down and it weighs 1 ounce, in a mile it translates into 55 pounds. So if it's 5 ounces, time 5, and it ends up almost 300 pounds. And the accumulation of the weight and physiological disadvantage comes at the wrong part of the race. The end of the race, when it's most important to be able to increase their speed, they've shot the energy as well as the strength. I made a shoe that I don't know whether, I never tested it on anybody, but it weighed 23 grams. We want to have them have the lightness of an Abibi Bikila but we want the durability so the fellow can go out and run down through the streets of Rome and he isn't going to puncture his feet with broken glass. Facilities is the big change. There are lots more people, but the facilities make for better athletes' times. There's a fellow named Jesse Owens held the world record at 9.4. Now it's 9 flat. This track is so much faster than the old Cinders track.
The running track of Hayward Field, where Phil Knight did his running, was rebuilt with money from athletes that Nike endorsed. Bowerman never became a businessman. He's a teacher.
Teacher can't live their lives for them, but he can preach to them. And I guess to counsel, teach, or whatever you want to call it, you make a plan, and then the teacher maybe works for them only once a week. That was all I ever worked with a person, because I can't run with them. when they either in practice or I can't run when they're in competition. I think that having talked about who they're going to run against and how they're going to run the race, it's a lonesome feeling for a fellow to go out there and hear that gun fired. And if he is emotionally, that is, if he has thought through what he wants to do, if he has trained himself, not necessarily to be first, but to have done his best, then he can walk away and say, Dad, I did my best.
The sports gear business is a new business, rooted in the changing rhythms of the 70s. It's moving almost faster than a 100-meter sprint. 4 times a year, sales representatives from around the world gather to hear what people are supposed to buy in the coming quarter. The company, in accordance with its stature and success, makes this meeting into an outing, exhausting the participants with spiritual and physical exercise.
The attitude should be really positive, that basically the salespeople have all had a great fall, and they're, I'm sure, very optimistic about next fall as well. Penny is here, and President Donahue, and it's a social event as well as a business event. I think there's some truth in that, yeah.
The values of Knight and the company are presented strongly during these events.
It really is anti-country club in the design of its products and the attitude of its ads, which really kind of reflects, I think, a little bit is anti-establishment, I think. That's what we really are.
No longer is what you wear for a sport an insignificant matter. In the past decades, people have become more interested in sport and fitness than ever before, and a new industry provided them with the equipment needed for it, adding color, choice, and a little attitude.
It's certainly a far, far different industry than it was when we started in it. I think that there is a new industry here of which we have been one of the main architects and are currently the leader. And it's really made up of the old shoe business, the old apparel business, kind of, and accessories business and sports. It's a combination of kind of all 4 of those things, which is really, in my view, a new industry. I always thought from the time that the paper was written that it could be bigger than what other people thought. I mean, when we started out, everybody said, hey, you hear what Knight's doing? He's selling Japanese track shoes. How funny is that? What I hoped that it would be big enough to pay me a decent salary. And of course, it's gone way beyond that. But a lot of it has been that the industry has gotten so much bigger. I don't think anybody really foresaw that in the early 1970s. And I just don't think there's any way that sports, which is where kind of this comes off of, is going to be reduced in the public mind over the next 25 years. It's just going to grow and grow. And then the fitness side of that, which is also important, the same thing, is that there's in the United States now that walking is becoming an important fitness activity. We're on the way to having 150 million fitness consumers out there potentially.
Born from the ambitions of track and field athletes with little idea how to run a multi-million-dollar business, the management misjudged the importance of aerobics when they appeared in the early 80s. This coincided with the normal business cycle of good and bad times and the personal doubts of Phil. The effect, though not disastrous, was serious.
We grew very, very quickly from 0 to almost $1 billion, and then really hit some real turbulence. And it was a very difficult time, kind of personally and emotionally.
He took a sabbatical because he wanted to take a sabbatical. I mean, he called it, I think at some time, that it was his midlife crisis, that he didn't, but it happened to come at a time when the company had some very bad luck. He would be the last one to suggest that his leaving contributed to that bad luck. I mean, things went wrong, and things just started to deteriorate. The market went off, product was off, we weren't doing very well.
One of the things that happened, obviously, was the brand cycle, the formula. People, could find out what we were doing on the formula, and basically you kind of got to reinvent that new formula. On top of those things, there was a management that was really geared to the very entrepreneurial, both personality-wise and skill-wise. And they had difficulty, that management had difficulty dealing with, a company that really required, at least a little bit more scientific management.
Painful on two levels. One, simply it was a tough experience from a business side, but even more, it was a very painful.
That really required, at least a little bit more scientific management.
Painful on two levels. One, simply it was a tough experience from a business side, but even more, it was a very painful experience to have to lay people off, to take people out of jobs. I think he visibly suffered from that. It was probably one of the toughest things he's ever had to do, was let people go from the company.
There were something like 9 vice presidents when Nike went public in 1980, and none of them is still here really in 1990. All but one of them left of his own choice, and that really for valid reasons. They were all millionaires. They said, this is a pain. I really don't enjoy this anymore. I don't need it. And then after a while, I'm leaving. But it was, to say it wasn't painful, nevertheless, to me. It really, if we're going to take credit collectively, I think we take blame collectively too. And there were just a lot of errors made by a lot of people, including the speaker. The way we pulled out of it, and it wasn't overnight, it was really kind of a 3-year haul, but it was basically the old managers left, and we had a whole new group of managers in that were very good and were much more equipped to deal with the problems of a company of $1 billion rather than a company of $10 million. And then the other word, obviously, is TV. We were the first in the industry to go national TV advertising campaigns, and the whole thing came together to lift us to this stage. There is such a thing as gravity, and no company goes up forever. There's always some downturns, so I think certainly in the decade of the 90s that Nike will hit a bump. What we're trying to do is position ourselves so it's a soft landing and it's delayed as long as possible. And I hope, and I do believe that it won't be as severe, percentage-wise as it was in the mid-1980s.
He's been called one of the most powerful men in sport, the best manager in American industry, and more. The founder of an enterprise that grew so fast to such heights is logically strongly identified with that company. So strongly, in fact, that he's considered to be the company.
Well, Nike is not Phil Knight. It's been said that Nike is young and irreverent, and Phil Knight is neither.
I think everything that's special and unique about Nike really is a reflection of Phil Knight. I mean, it's a little bit odd. It's highly competitive. It's very demanding.
I think, that basically I've had a lot of input, but basically the character, the culture, the personality of the company is different than any one individual. It really becomes a living thing. It becomes a child. It becomes a teenager. It becomes an adult. And its personality is really structured either by intent or by osmosis by the people that work there.
The real art of collaborative management is to get all the different points of expertise to come together and to put their opinion and to throw themselves into trying to solve a problem, but also have them aware of what the other points of view are from the other disciplines.
It's a teamwork style, and it's a sports style, and that is that you're not caught up in the boundaries of my job. It only works if the design works with marketing in close concert to get great products, and if design succeeds and marketing fails, they both fail.
It can be difficult at times, and it can be befuddling to people who come in from outside the company who expect to have a very clear chain of command and a very authoritarian structure. It's not that way. There's much more of a feel to how decisions get made, and it really is an art to make it work.
The culture attracts people who like to work hard. It attracts people who are risk takers and are not afraid to fail, because there's a lot of failure to get to success. That means you attract people who are not afraid to try, and you attract people who like to be on the edge and try things that maybe haven't been tried before.
The style of management that we have used under what we call a matrix management has done us very, very well for the last 5 or 6 years. In other words, we had to change our management style in 1986, 1987. It was a sort of a painful transition. It's been successful since 87. But now that we're going on and up over $4 billion, we'll probably have to make some more adjustments going forward. I think a certain management approach works for a certain size company, and then after you get to another size, you have to change it a little bit. getting so big that, I mean, no one man can take care, of all the major daily operations. And we have, with our effort in Amsterdam, for example, and our effort in Hong Kong for Asia, broken down into smaller units. It gets more difficult in the United States when you're talking about one brand, one country type of thing, and that's about a $2.5 billion chunk of the whole pie. But it is important that we over the next couple of years really kind of decentralize, not necessarily geographically decentralize, but responsibility decentralize, much more than we are now. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to grow.
Not any one person is really smart enough to know how to run, in this case, a $4 billion company. I don't care how smart they are.
I really do believe this word collaboration has been, in oversimplified terms, really been the key to the success that we've had.
He is not afraid of change. He is not afraid. He doesn't feel he's committed to a path that's been traveled. He will change direction. He will invent a new strategy because, frankly, he's leading a company that's going where no other company has ever been.
We kind of have to reinvent ourselves, and we've had those discussions. We have certain plans in place to try and do that, but the problem is nobody knows for sure whether any of it's going to work.
Consumed, really, with the business because he is about as intense a person, and he's very deceptive to the outside. People think that he's kind of laid back and kind of relaxed and things of that nature. I don't think that there's a moment that goes by in a day or the night that he isn't focusing on the business or what's happening to it.
He's there at 7:30 in the morning, and he's there at 6 o'clock at night, and he knows most of the people that work for him.
The success or failure of Nike, growing over and above $4 billion is really going to be dependent on hundreds, if not thousands, of people out there.
He's very easy to disagree with in the sense that there's really no fear of reprisal or I know in other companies people wouldn't consider disagreeing with their boss, but I think if you feel that something's different, he wants you to tell him so, and you can have a good discussion about it, and you might change your mind or he might change his, but it's done on the merits of the debate rather than on the rank.
He's a good listener, though, but I think he's just some kind of a brilliance inside of him that separates him from a lot of people. That ability to think about the future and plan, I think, is his biggest asset.
He's very generous, but that's something that is not very well known. His personal generosity is something that he's chosen not to publicize. But he is very, very generous, very giving, and very concerned. He's very, very family-oriented, and he is not particularly interested in a lot of publicity or public recognition. He avoids that kind of aggressively.
Phil Knight is a shy, private man, an individualist who loves sport and loves to be challenged. Nike has become the major endorser of athletes in the world. In many sports, the best will wear clothes and shoes from the company. No longer is the product sold from the backs of cars, and Knight gets a chance to combine work and pleasure by visiting major tournaments. Tennis has played an important role in the development of the company. The choice of tennis for endorsement was a good one, for it turned out to be an invaluable vehicle for talking to large audiences.
The world sport for forever almost. I know this morning we went out to the old Kooyong Stadium where they used to hold this tournament, where they had so many Davis Cup ties over the years, and you could just feel the emotion on the lawns out there. Rod Laver walked here, and John Newcomb did, and so it's been a worldwide sport for as long as I can remember. John McEnroe was probably my favorite tennis player of all time. I liked the way he played. I liked his intensity. McEnroe was the one that really distinguished himself, not only with his play, but with his attitude. The people that say that McEnroe and I are alike, I thank them. I consider it a compliment. Absolutely, the will to win is one of the things I admire most about him.
Game at the 3 balls.
obviously Andre Agassi since then, and Jim Courier, and so there've been a lot of good ones. Obviously, those are all Nike wearers, and so that's the most important thing of being a favorite player of mine. But the non-Nike wearers, I'll have to grudgingly admit there have been a few good ones, and obviously I think Bjorn Borg is the one that stands out.
I think it's the increasing endorsement price is just a reflection of the fact that sports is getting to be bigger and bigger business. There's a lot of writers in the United States that wish sports was back the way it was in the 1960s. Unfortunately, they don't wish that their own salary goes back there.
15 years ago, when Bjorn Borg basically was at the top of the world in tennis, he had 3 different shoe endorsements, one for Europe, one for the United States, and one for Asia. You can't do that now because the television set has those events going on simultaneously around the world. But I think that also gives a lot more punch to the endorsements that he has. So the price is really a reflection of the consumer interest and ultimately the sales that it generates. We haven't reached the peak in terms of what athletic endorsements will grow to, but I think it's going to get bigger before it gets smaller.
The interest of the company has spread to all sectors of sport. The mistake of the early 80s, ignoring a new trend, will be aggressively avoided. So soccer will be an area in which Nike wants to show its strength. For Phil Knight, sport and business are all about winning.
The best thing in sports is winning, and the second best thing is losing.
But the biblical term is that, know ye not that in a race run all, but only one obtains the prize. And I think that if a fella's going to be so broken up over the fact that he didn't win the race, it's going to be a tough life. Someone once asked me, was Phil a runner? I said, yes, he was a very good one. I said, very few people remember the number 2 runner. Phil went through school with Jimmy Grella, who was a national champion, and I did not run them against each other more than twice during their career. It isn't good for the winner, and it isn't good for the number 2 man.
Jimmy Connors had, I think, one of the best explanations for a competitor. He says, it isn't that I like to win so much, it's just that I hate losing.
Phil Knight is a winner who knows about losing. He's a rich man, preferring life in the shadow. He's shy, tries to minimize publicity around himself, and neither exploits nor publicizes his incredible wealth. He's very much his own man and always has been. His desk reflecting his relaxed attitude to office discipline. Knight is an exemplary winner in the sport called entrepreneuring. From a financial point of view, Phil Knight is way beyond having to scratch a living. The motivation to be out of bed and at work by 7:30 every morning is now coming from a different direction.
For almost all entrepreneurs that kind of make it, is that there gets to be a point where it isn't about the money anymore. And for me, I think that's true. The creative side of business, that's the part that I think is most enjoyable to me, to watch the organization be creative. You take a look at what Walt Disney has done over the last 5 or 10 years under its new management, and those are the positive aspects of business. And the earnings per share, which are really earnings per share are really for a businessman what the stopwatch is for a track and field man. It's important, but it's just a part of the puzzle and is really the end result of how creative and how efficient you are. But I think for me personally, the thing that pushes me as much as anything is sort of Nike the company, which is sort of my painting or my novel. And so it's more than just money. It's really something that is maybe an unfinished work of art that we hope could be ultimately a masterpiece, but certainly isn't yet.
I try not to look back because, I mean, basically 95% of your time is spent on addressing the problems that you see out in the future and how to attack markets and that sort of thing. And I think if you spend a lot of time and look in the rearview mirror, why there's always somebody out there that's trying to beat you. But there is every once in a while that I will sit up in my office and it's late at night and there's lights along the running track and And I think about starting in my basement with a card table and a baby scale to weigh shoes for postage. And it's been a fantastic trip. I was a kid of the 50s. Played baseball, basketball, ran track. I wrote about sports for the Cleveland High Blotter. I hated the Yankees because they always won. And I wore Converse sneakers. I went to Oregon to run for Bill Bowerman. He was part genius, part madman, and he was the best coach I ever had. I got my first pair of real track shoes my freshman year, Adidas, 3 stripes. I kept them in my room on their own shelf under a spotlight. I loved those shoes. After college, I went to business school. They told us to write a thesis about what we knew. I knew a lot about track and a little about sneakers. So when the rest of America was worried about missiles in Cuba, I was writing about making shoes in Japan. I worked for an accounting firm. Then Kennedy was assassinated and a whole generation of us began to think, what's the point? When you're working with debits and credits, it's easy to think, what's the point? I guess for me, the point was track shoes. 6 months later, our first shipment arrived from Japan. For a couple of years, I led a double life, counting beans by day, selling shoes by night. My father said, when are you going to quit fooling around with those shoes and concentrate on your real job? So I quit my real job and began fooling around with the shoes full time. In 1972, we launched the Nike brand for real at the Olympic trials in Eugene. Back then, marketing meant a couple pairs of shoes and some free t-shirts. There were about 100 marathoners at the trials. We signed up 4 pretty good ones. They finished 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Our first poster. I went to school, got married, had kids, worked for a living. And until I realized that Bill Bowerman's waffle iron was for real, I had never done a crazy thing in my life.
Follow your dream.
My ultimate nightmare is a grandkid saying, what did you do? And I said, well, I founded Nike. And they say, what's a Nike?